Well, I don't know about you, but that was total chaos. My name's Aaron, this is the 5 Red Lights, and let's discuss the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix.
1 light, 2 lights, 3 lights, 4 lights, 5 lights, and it's go!
A chaotic and crazy Grand Prix which had many fans fearing the worst for pretty much the entirety of the race. Controversy was followed by yet more controversy as we saw some big accidents, 2 safety cars, 2 red flags, several virtual safety car periods, and eventually a winner in Lewis Hamilton. Lewis won from Max Verstappen and he took the fastest lap point, which means the two of them are equal at the top of the World Championship, separated by only their number of victories after 21 Grand Prix. Driving standards were called into question, and so were the processes of the FIA race director and stewards. So there's lots to discuss today. Let's start with pointing you in the direction of my Twitter, which is in the top left corner at 5_red_lights. So chuck a follow on there. And also, I'm going to point you in the direction of the big, nice rectangular red button that says subscribe. So if you enjoy what you see here on the channel, please be sure to subscribe. It would really help me out and it would mean a lot to me, and I'd be very grateful for it. So let's dive on into driver ratings. Let's start there, because then we can talk about everybody before we focus on Max and Lewis and their multiple moments through the race. So Lewis coming out on top, having delivered the pole lap that he needed to put the pressure on Max Verstappen, who then made a mistake. And he won the start and he fought back after a bit of a bad luck swing with the red flag. He survived Max's several lunges at turn 1 and the contact on the back straight. Overall, a deserved victory for Lewis. We'll get a bit more into his race later on, especially with Max. So I rate his performance as a 4. In second place was Max Verstappen, and he blew the pole position lap. He was way up. He was 0.2 of a second up, and he blew it. It was a simple error. He braked too late. He was pushing too hard. He must have known on his delta how far ahead he was, so he didn't need to be that aggressive into the final corner. Will he ever learn? That's the big question. Questionable driving standards. He doesn't need to drive that the way he does sometimes. Certainly in the way that Michael Schumacher crossed lines when he didn't need to. Max is kind of heading in a similar direction, which is kind of worrying because he's better than that. I think he needs to reassess his approach to racing combat over the winter because it might just be about to cost him a world championship. So from a third place grid start, following his error in qualifying, he finishes second. Now he's level on points with Lewis. It's all to play for in Abu Dhabi. I rate his weekend performance as a 2. In third place, only just by like 1/10 of a second, was Valtteri Bottas. Rescued a podium after being shuffled down the order at the red flag and the restarts. He bore the brunt of the bad luck for Mercedes today, but he did rescue a podium right at the last, snatching a podium from the jaws of a 4th place. He did start on the front row, so he got a little bit of luck there on the Saturday. But overall, I rate Valtteri's performance as a 2.5. In 4th place was Esteban Ocon for Alpine, so close to a second consecutive podium. The first time they would have had back-to-back podiums since 2013. He managed his way through the carnage beautifully, and very unlucky to miss out on that podium. Just the sheer power of the Mercedes power unit and the way that car is set up just absolutely snookered Ocon. It wasn't a huge run to the line, but he still didn't have enough. He survived the squeeze of Tsunoda at the initial start and was brave to take early places. Made the most of fortune falling his way to take a very nice result indeed. I rate Esteban's performance as a 4.5, considering he came from 9th to 4th and kept his name pretty much clean the whole way through. In 5th place was everybody's favourite Australian, Daniel Ricciardo. Started 11th, a little bit of a loose floor in qualifying, which hampered his hopes of a good qualifying result. The red flag hurt his long-term chances, but it kind of ended up where he would probably have been anyway. Because if we had the first restart go on as normal, I think he was running fourth, and he could have been on. Before the red flag, what am I talking about? He was on the hard tyres. So if they'd gone without the red flag and they'd just gone with the safety car, he'd have been running on the hards, and he could have gone quite deep into the race. And we saw how well the hards held up for Lewis. And then he could have stuck on a set of mediums a little bit closer to the end and really made some moves. That would have been quite fun to see. But it was always going to work out with lots of safety cars for Daniel. But yeah, helpful points for McLaren, although Ferrari did get a double points finish as well, so they don't really make that much dent into Ferrari's lead. For Daniel, though, I rate his performance as a 3. In 6th place was Pierre Gasly, finished where he started. Not really noticed very much after the second restart. He kept himself out of trouble, came home 6th, and again, consistency from Pierre, operating at a very high standard. Sometimes the AlphaTauri is very close to being the best of the rest behind Mercedes and Red Bull, and other times it's just a little bit behind McLaren and Ferrari. So I think they were kind of in that no man's land between McLaren and Ferrari and the rest of the midfield this weekend. They were certainly faster than Alpine, so they were a little bit unfortunate to not gain a place there. As for his weekend rating, I gave him a 2.5. In 7th place was the first of the Ferraris in Charles Leclerc, a bit of a wild ride for Charles. He had contact with Sergio Perez, which could have taken him out of the race, and almost had a tangle with his teammate, but they raced pretty fairly. And it was quite interesting to see them go wheel to wheel, actually. And Ferrari fans probably aren't used to seeing that, because they've got a bit of a history of not letting their cars race. So for Charles, it could have been a lot worse. He could have been out of the race, or he could have had to restart from the back with a broken front wing or something. But P7 is pretty good for them, all things considered. Charles did qualify that Ferrari in 4th place as well, which I know we kind of expect him to deliver the goods on a Saturday afternoon, but that's still a very good effort to get it ahead of a Red Bull. So for Charles, I rate his performance as a 2.5. For Carlos Sainz in 8th place, he missed out on Q2 when he damaged his rear wing with a spin in Q2. But a good recovery from P15 and some very tidy overtakes early on in the race. I don't know if he was actually asked to let Leclerc back through towards the end. He may have just lost the position racing, so we didn't see it, and I still haven't been able to find anything out. But for Carlos, a good recovery, finished behind his teammate, went wheel to wheel with Charles, and generally, it's Carlos. He's a smooth operator, and I rate his performance as a 3. In 9th place was Antonio Giovanazzi. He put a really nice move on Fernando Alonso early on in the race after qualifying in 10th place, and he bagged himself P9 at the flag, so not bad for someone who's on the way out and into Formula E. Perhaps he can really show us what he's all about when he moves over there, because he won't be the first F1 driver to make that jump and be successful, so wait and see how he does there. But nice that he's finishing on a high with Alfa Romeo there, who are inching a little bit closer to Williams, but it's probably not quite enough at this stage. So for Antonio, it is a rating of 2.5. For Antonio, it's a rating of 3. Sorry, I was reading the one below. In 10th place was Lando Norris. He was very unlucky with the timing of the red flag. Well, to be fair, the safety car came at a good time for him to get off the soft tyres, but then the red flag kind of killed his chances of a good result, because he just never was able to get into a position where he was earlier in the race. So 10th, which wasn't representative of his pace this weekend, but a decent recovery, having been shuffled way down the order. So for Lando, it is a 2.5 rating. Moving to those outside the points, and in 11th place was Lance Stroll. Aston Martin struggled for pace all weekend, and getting points would have been a bit of a steal for them. So perhaps 11th place is about fair, maybe. But But a solid drive from Lance nonetheless, following up from his really nice drive in Qatar. So for Lance, I rate him as a 2.5. In 12th place was Nicholas Latifi, who came oh so close to being collected in that pile-up at the second restart. He avoided all the mayhem in the end, and there weren't enough further dropouts for him to get more points this season. But, credit where credit's due. He's delivering. He's keeping himself out of trouble. And he's looking like a reliable pair of hands for Williams. So maybe going forward, he'll become a bit more of a baseline driver. So, this is what we can expect the car to do. And if we have a good to exceptional driver such as George Russell and Alex Albon in the car, we can potentially exceed that and push the car even further. So for Nicholas, he's doing everything he needs to do as a racing driver for Williams, and I rate his performance as a 2.5 as well. For Fernando Alonso in 13th, it was a bad day, really, wasn't it? He had a bit of a spin. He tried his best to get the field bunched up with a safety car for the debris, but you can only but try, and Fernando Alonso will always try whatever he can within the rules to gain some advantage, close the field up. So it was a disappointing afternoon for Fernando. Boxed late on for softs and was trying to go for the fastest lap, even though he wouldn't have got the point for it, but still couldn't do it. The Alpine just wasn't quite to his liking this weekend, and he was comfortably beaten by Esteban Ocon, who got a bit more fortune and reward for his bravery. So for Fernando, it's a rating of 2, and behind him was Yuki Tsunoda, who did qualify in the top 10, qualified 8th, dropped places at the start, had a clumsy accident with Sebastian Vettel, picked up, I think, a 5-second time penalty, which was deserved, and came home 14th after a change of front wing. So I rate his performance as a 2. And also getting a 2 is Kimi Raikkonen. He caused the accident with Vettel with a bit of a dumb move, to be honest. It's a fast left-hander. You cannot go 2 cars side by side through that section, no matter how hard you try, even if you are both world champions. So for Kimi to be thinking about doing that was just smacked of a bit of a blasé attitude. He didn't care anymore. He was just going to try it, and if it worked, it worked. If it didn't, it didn't. And he didn't really care that Vettel would be collateral damage, to be honest. So for Kimi, I think he deserves his rating of 2, because having done as many Grand Prix as he has, I'd expect better judgment. Let's move on to the first of the non-finishers, which was Sebastian Vettel. Dismayed to be 17th on the grid and out in Q1. I think he thought it was a good lap, but clearly there was just not enough pace in the Aston Martin this weekend. And a bit of a victim of everybody else's misjudgments. Collected by Tsunoda, contact with Kimi, and his car was falling apart, and they pitted to save the power unit. There's only one race left. I mean, unless Aston Martin think they're going to rock up and win in Abu Dhabi, there was not really much point in claiming that. But Seb, he drove well, all things considered, his car being spun around and crashed into and bits falling off of it. So I give him a 2.5. And also he organised the little go-karting race for women on, I think it was Thursday. Thursday. To raise awareness for women's sport in the Middle East, which is just fantastic. He's winning a lot of friends, Sebastian, after many years of not being the most popular guy in the paddock, for the fans at least. So, he's supporting all the right causes, and it's really good to see him and Lewis getting behind these important issues and using their voices as multiple world champions to do it. So credit to Sebastian for that. Sergio Perez, 17th. Unfortunate collision with Leclerc, which left him out of the race, and he did fail in his bid to get ahead of Charles at the start, the very first start. But it's really hard to say what he would or wouldn't have been able to do, because he was taken out so early in the race, and and things hadn't really begun to unfold. So I award him a 2.5 rating. Also out was Nikita Mazepin, blameless for once in an accident, nowhere to go. Just a bit unfortunate. Very lucky to walk away unhurt from that accident, so I rate him as a 2. George Russell, caught out by the cluster that was forming in front of him and then rear-ended by Mazepin. Not his fault, not Nikita's fault, just it was just a collection of unfortunate circumstances that all happened at once. So he was out of the race. A rating of 2 for George. And the first retirement was Mick Schumacher. It was unsurprising that his car got away from him at turn 22. It's a total dog of a car. And also it was following the Williams, so it would probably not have had as much downforce as Mick hoped or expected. So that might be one of the primary causes for Mick losing control of the car and smashing heavily into the barriers. But fortunately he was out and okay. No harm done there. So there are my driver ratings for the weekend. Let me know if you agree or disagree with them. I think I may have been a touch harsh on a few of them, but I will clarify some of that in the next section, which is going to be the Max and Lewis incidents. So let's get stuck into those. So I'm going to go through these incidents one by one because I've got 5 of them noted down. So we're going to go turn 1 at the first restart. So after the first red flag, you've got Max on the pole position, Lewis in second, and Lewis wins that start decisively. He's comfortably ahead going into turn 1, and Max lunges it down the outside, and Lewis basically drove the way that Verstappen would have driven if he was in that position, and he forced Verstappen wide in the same way that Max has done time and again before. So if you think back to Imola, Max did exactly the same thing to Lewis and sent him bouncing over the sausage curbs. You could describe Max's lunge as a touch desperate, but he did have to go for it to keep that position to try and give himself an opportunity to win the race, because I think if Lewis had got ahead at that point and stayed ahead, there was no catching him had it been a green flag run to the end. Of course it wasn't, but that was kind of caused perhaps by Max and his dreadful way of rejoining. That was so dangerous, because it just forced everyone at the front to check up a little bit, which bunched everyone else together, which meant when they were trying to navigate their way through that really narrow section, some cars just had nowhere to go. Perez not at fault for the accident with Leclerc, because you can't see out of the mirrors in these cars, and he may have perceived himself to have a bit more space and be slightly ahead, but Leclerc can't back up because someone's going to go into the back of him in the same way that Mazepin did to Russell. The whole domino effect. Max didn't cause the accident directly, but he was one of the indirect causes that initiated it because of the way he rejoined. If he'd gone off and then just cut through without going over the curb, he'd have allowed everyone else to maintain the momentum around the corner. But he didn't do that. So Max banged to rights on that, and then they ended up with the red flag and this bizarre negotiation about start position, which I'll talk about later on as well. We're going to be discussing the FIA at the end of this podcast. Let's start with turn 1 and the second restart. So Esteban Ocon finds himself on pole position. Christmas has come early for him at Alpine, and Lewis is in second place again, having nailed the first restart. But Max, importantly, is on the medium tyres in third place. Gets a great launch, and he went for it. And this here was everything that is great about Max Verstappen. It was ballsy, it was hard, it was fair though. Most importantly, it was fair, because the gap was there. And that's the way you win places at the start. How many times do we see someone just send it down the inside, be brave, and get the reward? Lewis left that gap, which was a bit naive of him, perhaps you could say, but he left a gap. Max went for it, so he reaped the benefits of that and had the track position. Let's fast forward though to lap 37. Now, let's start with the turn 1 incident. And Lewis got a great run on Max. And Max knew it. He had to defend. He was trying to break the toe. And he defended exactly as you expect him to do so, by trying to break the toe as much as possible, cover the inside, and brake as late as possible. I'll touch on that in a minute. Lewis used every bit of the slipstream that he could. He got super close before he got too close a little bit later on in the lap. He was trying to get a maximum overspeed to make sure that he could get around the outside into turn 1 and pinch the apex for turn 2. Now, Max, as I said, wanted to brake really late, and he went in a little bit too hot and lost control. He was sliding across, and he was kind of lucky to not be out of the race in another collision with Lewis. But a collision would have benefited Max, because he goes into the final race with a lead of 8 points in that sense. On repeat viewings, I feel that this was the most desperate move that Max made. And it was borderline reckless, because he may have been banking on the grip on the inside being similar to how it was at the second restart, where he dived down the inside. However, at this point his tyres were much older, and obviously he'd have been carrying a lot more speed. So it was just a little bit too far over the edge in terms of the way he was driving, and then to just keep driving on was, kind of compounded the issue, because if he'd immediately let up and allowed Hamilton the place, because he'd forced him off the road, and we've been here before, we've been there in Interlagos, and if you want to see a little bit of analysis on that from myself, I'll leave a link to it down in the description below. Now, the stewards eventually ruled on this as a 5-second time penalty, which, based on previous incidents this season, let's think back to Austria, where Norris and Leclerc and Perez were shoving each other off the track. This is absolutely the right decision, and Red Bull can have absolutely no complaints, because Max has gone in. If he'd had control of the car, if he'd just eased Lewis out to the line and had the corner, it would have been fine. But he's gone in and he's clearly out of control because he's sliding. So, he clearly braked too late. So the stewards had no other option other to, they tried to hand the position back, and we'll get onto that next. But in the end, they had to award the 5-second time penalty. Now let's jump forward to the end of that same lap 37, and Red Bull have been told to give the place up, and Max was informed to do this strategically, and they did not choose a smart place to do this. But trying to gain a benefit out of it is absolutely fine. Trying to steal the DRS, I can understand that completely. We've all tried to do that on the Formula 1 game when we're racing online. We're all guilty of it. But doing it in real life is, especially at this track, is playing with fire. My issue is that it was on a DRS straight where they're travelling at such high speeds. If Lewis had a bigger closing speed or not read the situation the way that he did and slowed down, think back to Mark Webber in Valencia 2010, where he somersaulted over the back of Heikki Kovalainen's Lotus Caterham thing, whatever you want to call it. Spectacular accident. Very lucky that he got out of it. But we don't want to see cars ending up upside down. We don't want to see cars going through the air. And this is the sort of thing that could have happened. And it could have been something utterly terrible. And this is something everyone was worried about. Everyone was fearful of something going wrong, someone getting hurt. And we had an accident in the F2 race at the start where Teo Porcher was stalled on the grid, and Enzo Fittipaldi, was it? Yeah, it was Enzo, one of the many Fittipaldi boys, ploughed into the back of him. It's the sort of thing that can happen at the start of a race. It never makes for good viewing. It's never, we're just thankful that the both of them are okay. And we could have had a repeat sort of accident in Formula 1, and bear in mind these cars do such higher speeds. Now the stewards' post-race decision you could say is perhaps a touch soft for what happened, because it was a 10-second time penalty added to Max's race. Now, it is what it is. I think if they've deemed him to have been the predominant cause of the collision between Max and Lewis, and yes, he's hit the brakes, but he has not brake tested Lewis. Let's get this straight. I do not think he brake tested Lewis, because a brake test would have been both of them out of the race, and it would have been completely obvious, because we've seen it before with other drivers. Now, on Lewis's part, yes, why did he not drive straight past? Well, he was probably playing the same game. He didn't want to hand Verstappen the DRS. And, there was so much going on in this race. He may have thought, is there debris? Is there a virtual safety car? He had no communication from the team as to what was about to happen. And then it all got a bit silly. There was starting and stopping and changing his direction, and eventually contact, and the battle lines were drawn many months ago, and they're still crossing swords. It's one that's going to divide opinion everywhere, and at the end of the day, it just wasn't sensible. It wasn't safe, and we don't want to see things like that. Now, if we jump forward a few laps to lap 42 and lap 43, the same corner, turn 27, Max eventually manages to hand the position back, but takes it back immediately, diving down the inside, and he picked up the DRS, which is exactly what he wanted to happen the first time around. But based on Belgium 2008, which Lewis referenced post-race, this just isn't allowed. If you're going to be taking wins away from drivers historically, you cannot start allowing this to happen 13, 14 years down the line. They need to clarify the rules on this, in terms of, the directives must be very clear on the method of how you hand back a position and what you're then allowed to do afterwards. So how many corners do you have to wait? Can you do it in a DRS zone? Can you pick up the DRS afterwards? Maybe they should have a penalty zone, like the long lap in MotoGP. So here they could have had like a little section around the outside of turn 27 where Max could have gone off, allowed Lewis to take the lead, and then come back through. And he could have got a good slingshot out there, can still get on the power nice and early and pick up the slipstream, even if Lewis has the DRS. So you get the slipstream benefit in that respect. Lewis's response on lap 43, when Max was trying to allow him past again, I think, or unless I didn't really see the build up to it, we just saw them side by side, and Lewis decided to push Max basically off the track, to stop him breezing past again with DRS. More than a bit rude, but I think Lewis had said enough's enough. I'm not taking any more of this. And if I put myself in that position, I'd have probably done something similar. But this is where driving standards are being called into question. We cannot have people forcing each other off the track on purpose. You've got to leave room to race, and the amount of debris that was out there. And look, I'm a Lewis fan, but if he'd put Verstappen over there, and Verstappen had picked up a puncture which had let go at a high-speed section, say going into turn 22, you don't want to see drivers getting hurt. We all don't like Mazepin for what he's said, done, and the way he acts at times, but we're all glad that he got out of that car alive and in one piece when he had his collision with George Russell. Now, whether you stand Team LH or if you're a Max Verstappen fan, an accident for Max where he gets hurt is not the way we want to see this World Championship decided. We want to see it decided on the track in fair competition. And I think both drivers that at this point were now guilty of overstepping the mark in terms of what was allowed and what can be deemed acceptable. So several incidents between these two, and now we're level on points, a final race showdown, winner takes all in Abu Dhabi, a reprofiled circuit as well. So Max won there last year, but Lewis was recovering from COVID and Mercedes hadn't developed their car as much, but Mercedes have generally been strong there over the last several years. It's anybody's game. It's completely up for grabs. But let's just hope that the FIA sort themselves out in time, because I'm going to discuss them next. And, well, they just leave so much to be desired, don't they? But Max and Lewis, so many incidents. It's fascinating to watch. It's a brilliant rivalry. It's starting to spill over. It's starting to get a little bit nasty, and I think that's too much. I think this needs to remain a respectful racing rivalry, even if they're not friends. We don't want to see people taking each other off the track, Senna Prost style. We've left that a long way behind. We are better than this as a sport. So let's hope that they've both read the riot act by their teams and they buck their ideas up for Abu Dhabi. So finally, let's complete this podcast with the FIA. And they're not really fit for purpose, are they, at the moment? It was a chaotic and dramatic race on the track, but it wasn't just confined to the tarmac, because Michael Masi was again in the thick of it on the airwaves. He had a negotiation with Red Bull at the first red flag regarding the restart positions. Also, the second red flag regarding dropping Verstappen back, or then if they didn't accept that, it will be referred to the stewards. He's basically saying, pick your poison. Do you want this, or do you want it to go to the stewards and have a possible time penalty? So Red Bull did, the smart thing and thought, well, how can we get the most out of this? If we drop back and start on mediums, we might be able to get a jump, rather than risk losing the position and then collecting a 5-second penalty or 10 seconds or whatever from the stewards. And to be honest, it was borderline comical, which makes a mockery of the rules. It does need to be clear and simple. This means doing X means Y, and then we move on. There needs to be much less ambiguity. And then again, Masi he advised Red Bull to concede the position after the lap 37 turn 1 incident, but he hadn't informed Mercedes at that point, so he informed Red Bull first and then was trying to tell Mercedes what was going to happen. And this is always going to become a problem, because I know it's easy to say after the fact, but the training car should be informed first, because then they're prepared for what's going to happen in front of them. And you then instruct the lead team and lead car to concede the position, knowing that the car behind is prepared for what's about to happen, and they're aware that they are then allowed to take the position, so it becomes obvious when the car in front slows down that they go past. You don't have any of this silliness. And it's just a messy saga. It does nothing to arrest the decaying relations between Mercedes and Red Bull, because Red Bull used the word strategically. What does that mean? Does that mean pick up DRS, or does that mean try and slow him down and move around or whatever, force him offline to do it? Who knows what that means? There needs to be a clear and obvious way of conceding position. And this is just yet another in a long string of highly questionable, high-profile errors for Michael Masi that are beginning to allow others to question his judgment. But Christian Horner, harking back to Charlie Whiting, God rest his soul, that's not the answer. We cannot go back in time. It wasn't always better back then. Yes, we need a strong leader in that FIA race director's chair, and it's a tough job. It is a tough gig. Perhaps we need more than one. Maybe we need one who's going to deal with this, one who's going to deal with that. But then they feed back into, let's say, Michael Masi, and he directs them, or to sort of approve certain decisions. The whole process just needs clearing up. And it's just not helped, I think, by the fact that some of the rules are incredibly complex and at times very ambiguous. They're very open to interpretation. So they need to clear this up and give very clear, transparent, direct methods of policing the racing. Certain things are currently defined within the rules, but where does that definition end and it stray into areas where penalties can be applied? How far off the track do you have to force another car for it to be forcing a car off the track? Well, at the moment, nobody knows because of turn 4 in Sao Paulo. Max drove Lewis off the track and didn't pick up a penalty. Now, Max did force Lewis off the track in Saudi Arabia and did get a 5-second penalty, but he was asked to concede the position first. In Brazil, there was nothing to suggest that was the case. So it's so inconsistent, so that you need clear definition, clear parameters of what is and is not allowed, which, we as fans don't want an over-regulated sport, but we simply cannot allow the drivers to race in a lawless town, which Saudi Arabia was quickly descending towards. It's just not the place to do it. It wasn't the circuit to do it at. You can have your reservations about the circuit all you like, but the way you police all racing will factor into the racing that then is generated on the track. Yes, we want to see wheel-to-wheel racing. Yes, we want drivers to be brave and bold and competitive, but we don't want them to be dangerous and stupid, which some of the driving recently has been. Now, it is a tough gig, but the FIA really needs to look at how things are structured. They've got it wrong in other sports as well. There was farcical penalties in Formula E this year, where some cars had enough energy to finish the race and some didn't. It was too short of the safety car, and the kilowatts being taken away. And it's systemic, isn't it? It's clear that it's in Formula E, it's in Formula 1, it's in other sports that they have jurisdiction over as well. So the FIA at the moment aren't really fit for purpose because they're not able to police their sports appropriately. And I'm not saying it's easy to do it, but it's not as difficult as they're making it look at the moment. And if you can provide a rule set that is clear and defined and allows everyone to understand what they're doing, rulings will be clearer for stewards to apply, and drivers will have clarity on what is and is not permitted, and that will then allow us to have a clearer view on how we go racing, and then in turn it will provide a better sporting context because everyone will know what's going on. It won't just be total chaos like it was yesterday in Jeddah. So that is all for today. Of course, leave your comments in the comment section down below. There's no 5 things in this episode because I think there's been enough covered in this episode today. As I said at the beginning, subscribe if you enjoy what you find on this channel, and leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it. You can also find my episodes on most podcast platforms, so you can listen on the go. You don't have to just watch on YouTube. But if you do like what you see here, hit that subscribe button, and also follow me on Twitter at 5_red_lights. You can also find me on the Formula 1 Grid Talk podcast powered by the F1 Chronicle. I was on last night for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix race recap with Tom from EF1 and Tom from the Monkey Seat podcast and Phil from the Grip Strip podcast. We had a great time discussing the race between us there, and they do all sorts of other stuff, so go and check them out as well. Also on YouTube and on your favourite podcast providers. That's all from me. I will see you next week for the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. I'm going to be previewing it later this week, and then I'll do my race recap where we will have a world champion, Max Verstappen, a first-time champion, or Lewis Hamilton will have a record-breaking 8th World Championship. Who is it going to be? Chuck it in the comments down below. Who is coming out on top in Abu Dhabi? And I will see you when the 5 red lights go out there. My name is Aaron. This has been the 5 red lights. I'll see you next time. It's goodbye for now.